It's a check-in with the Money Desk. Rapiwa Madzena joins me in studio. So, Rapiwa, we, of course, are tracking the Sibanye-Stillwater negotiations, which continue with unions into the evening. But you're here to tell us about public sector talks, and that's a biggie.
That's a big one, and unions are asking for a big increase, Sally. So what we're talking about here is labour unions representing the country's 1.3 million state workers have demanded a 10% increase from the government. Now, they're presenting their case to the Public Sector Bargaining Council this week. eNCA has reliably learned that they are also seeking a 2,500 rand increase in monthly housing stipends. The union want a single-year pay deal because they remain unconvinced that government will honour longer-term agreements. The government has had to renege on the final year of a 3-year deal previously on the grounds that it was unaffordable. Let's talk more about this now. We've got Kevin Links, who's the chief economist at Standard. Thank you very much for your time this evening. 10%, Kevin. These unions have clearly gone in guns blazing. We all know that government can barely take care of the rest of the country, let alone the public sector workers.
That's exactly right. 10% is way in excess of what inflation is, obviously, and also way in excess of what government has budgeted for. In fact, if you look at government's budget, the 10% would be more than what government has budgeted for the next 3 years, actually a lot more than that. So clearly quite a high increase being demanded. You have to, I guess, acknowledge that it's the start of the negotiations. And as we know, the general strategy from unions is to start fairly high and then bring that negotiation down a bit. But if I look at government, what they've put into the actual budget, it's sort of 1 to 2% at most. So there's a huge gap between where government is, or at least where National Treasury is, and where unions are. And hopefully the thing can get resolved, because we can ill afford a massive public sector strike.
No, absolutely, Kevin. And in those negotiations, you're absolutely right. They negotiate down from that high figure. But ultimately, one would assume that the unions want to get to a figure that is above inflation, and government cannot afford that. You've just kind of painted that picture for us. So, I mean, I don't know. Could government's hand be forced in this situation? And if it is, what would that do to our fiscus?
Well, I guess it can be. Obviously, you can have strike activity, and given the size of the public sector unions all combined, it would have a massive disruptive effect on how South Africa functions, and already we're under significant pressure this year. So it's not something that we would be able to cope with very well, and you would hope that they come up with some agreement. In terms of the affordability, look, government is trying to get the fiscal position into much better shape, and we know that it's a long process. We know that that process has started. The rating agencies have acknowledged that South Africa is doing better. They've taken away our negative outlook, and we are a long way from getting credit rating upgrades, but we certainly can't afford to have a 10% salary increase in 1 year. So not at a time when government is trying to bring down the deficit, trying to control the debt level. And obviously, if you do give in to that 10% increase, then there are all kinds of other implications. The one is further inflation in South Africa, requiring the Reserve Bank to put up interest rates. There's no doubt that foreign investors won't see that favorably. You'd probably see the currency coming under pressure. So there are some significant negative implications if government does give in to that type of increase. I don't expect they will. I expect that we'll come up with something that is a much, much lower increase, but I do think government's probably in the end going to have to give in and go a bit above the 1 to 2% they've got in the budget at the moment.
A final thought from you, Kevin. Do you think that the unions might have a little less bargaining power, given that court case that we saw in February, where the court dismissed the unions' bid to have that 8% in salary increases granted to them? That might give government a little bit of manoeuvring room when it comes to the negotiation table.
Yeah, it's clear that you can legitimately argue that you can't afford these types of increases, and I think that's exactly right. There isn't any agreement in place that government is necessarily trying to renege on this time, but clearly I think that the message has gone through to the unions that the fiscal position is not what it was. South Africa's tax base just can't afford these types of increases. The economy is not big enough. And as it is, if you look at our government salary cost in total, it's certainly one of the highest in the world. So there are a whole range of reasons why we can't continue with these types of salary increases, and government has to be hard. And I know it is tough because obviously cost of living is going up, but we're not in a position to be able to afford those types of increases.
No, absolutely. Kevin Lings, as always, thank you very much for your time this evening. He's the chief economist at Standlib, joining us to talk about the national wage bill.